Although he might be the most powerful man in the universe, He-Man hasn't really had much joy in having his adventures adapted into a video game. Certainly not in the way that his fellow 80s cartoon characters like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or the Transformers have had. Now, considering that the classic cartoon features swords, sorcery and futuristic technology, it is a wonder why He-Man hasn't yet worked as a video game. With that in mind, for this video we're going to look over the history of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe in video game form, with a mission to try and find at least one of these games that are still worth playing today. Let's take a look. Our journey begins in 1983 with Masters of the Universe: The Power of He-Man, which has the distinction of being the first ever He-Man video game, released for the Atari 2600 and the Intellivision. Now, the characters on screen are tiny, so you'll just have to take my word for it that this is meant to be He-Man and Skeletor. However, as you can see here, the animation is very smooth, and the game is actually very playable. It is probably the best out of the 8-bit He-Man games that we're going to see here. So in this game, you'll either be in a level where He-Man is shooting at enemies whilst driving around in the Wind Raider, or he's trying to avoid all these magical spells that Skeletor is lobbing in his general direction, so they can get closer to old Bonehead and give him a good chinning. In all, it's not a bad way to start out the proceedings, but let's carry on and see what else we've got. Next up is Masters of the Universe: The Super Adventure, although it was also known as Masters of the Universe Terrorquake. This was a text-based adventure game developed by Adventuresoft and published by US Gold in 1986, which was adapted for the BBC Micro, Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum home computers. If you're unfamiliar with the idea of a text adventure game, basically you're given short paragraphs and a single picture to explain where you are, and you enter simple text commands such as talk, use, inspect, move left, move right, etc. to move around, talk with other people and generally interact with your surroundings. The attention to detail in this game is, well, somewhat lacking. Did anyone actually bother to check how to spell King Randor's name? Although He-Man fans enjoyed reading about their heroes' adventures in the various children's books that were available at the time, this wasn't necessarily the same kind of thing that they wanted to have in a video game, and it does make for a fairly dull and somewhat uninteresting experience. So let's move on then to Masters of the Universe: The Arcade Game. This was a platform game developed by Adventuresoft for the Amstrad CPC, BBC Micro, Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum, and published by US Gold in 1987. Now sadly, despite its title, this isn't an arcade-style scrolling beat-em-up, which you would have thought would be the ideal choice for a He-Man game. No, this one plays a bit like a Prince of Persia type platform game, where precision jumping is the key to avoid the various traps and pitfalls that He-Man must avoid. I suppose it's fairly on brand. There were several episodes of the cartoon where He-Man had to rely on his agility and his brain power rather than just all-out muscle in order to solve the various problems that Skeletor threw in his way. Unfortunately, because the Commodore 64 and other microcomputers only had the one button, the controls are pretty terrible, and trying to make those precision jumps can be an absolute nightmare at times. You'll likely lose a few lives, not necessarily from a lack of skill, but because the controls are an absolute pain in the backside. Having said that, this is still the best out of the 3 He-Man games that came out in the period of 1986 to 1987. The worst one of that period, unfortunately, is next. This was the one He-Man game that I actually played back in the day. Oh boy, I really wish I hadn't bothered. Masters of the Universe, the movie. This is an action-adventure game developed by Gremlin Graphics and published in 1987. It is based on the American film Masters of the Universe, the motion picture, which came out in the same year. The game does have scenes from the movie itself, such as He-Man battling against several of Skeletor's bounty hunters like Blade and Karg, and the final battle itself has He-Man fighting against the god Skeletor in Holly's fabulous Golden Glory. But the main game itself is terrible. It looks like a bad Zelda ripoff. The enemies respawn so quickly it's not even worth the time trying to fight them. And when you move from one screen to another, there's no consistency from one screen to the next, so it's very easy to get completely lost. I got bored of this very, very quickly, and likely you will as well. We're not quite done though with the 8-bits. We do have one more game from that era, although admittedly it's not an official one. He-Man on NES was an unofficial ROM hack of the Nintendo Entertainment System game Kung Fu, which was an adaptation of the arcade Kung Fu Master. Now, what this unofficial ROM hack does is replace that game's main hero, Thomas, with He-Man. He-Man can punch and kick exactly like Thomas does in the original game, but despite holding his sword in his hand, at no point does He-Man actually attempt to use it. He-Man fights some fairly obscure baddies from the toy line in this game, such as Ninja and Mosquito, but I suppose those characters would fit in quite well with how the original Kung Fu game played out. I mean, essentially this is just exactly the same game as Kung Fu, just with a sprite swap, so it's not exactly a faithful adaptation of the show. Not unless there's an episode of the show somewhere that essentially is He-Man doing Game of Death. I mean, I don't think there's one like that, but do let me know in the comment section if there is. Now, we wouldn't get another He-Man video game until the year 2002, when the new He-Man in the Master of the Universe cartoon began broadcasting. So yes, we didn't even get a video game adaptation off the back of the 90s cartoon The New Adventures of He-Man, which says it all, really. Initially, I am working on a video about the New Adventures of He-Man cartoon show, but I will be honest, it's becoming a bit of a slog to work on, as it means that I have to watch several episodes of the show itself. Ugh. And we're just coming on to a section now where we're talking about the scientists of Primus. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Anyway, that is very much a work in development at the moment. Look out for that video coming soon to my channel. So, the first game from the 2000X series, He-Man, Defender of Grayskull, was personally a massive letdown for me. This game was one of the reasons why I wanted to get hold of a PlayStation 2. And when I finally got to play the game, it was a huge disappointment. The game only ever got a PAL release as well, so no one outside of Europe got the chance to play this game. No one in America, no one in Japan, unless they were willing to get involved in some messing about with region locks, and quite frankly, it's not really worth the hassle. You would have thought that with the power of the PlayStation 2 that He-Man would finally get the game that he deserved, but the game just plays absolutely terribly. He-Man is an absolute wimp in this game, struggling against even the simplest of foes, and the appalling controls and camera didn't help either. Not to mention that the game had a number of bugs and glitches where He-Man would literally fall through the floor of the world and plummet to his doom. The game just feels very unfinished. It certainly hasn't gone through any kind of quality testing as far as I can see. And you get the impression that more time was spent making the cutscenes than the actual game itself. As a result, the game received mostly negative reviews upon its arrival.
We will find you. It's only a matter of time before all the power of Eternia is finally mine!
At the same time as Defender of Grayskull, there was also a Game Boy Advance game for the 2000X series. Masters of the Universe, He-Man, The Power of Grayskull. This is an isometric combat game that reminded me a lot of the old Sega Mega Drive game, The Immortal, only without the gory head splitting, of course. There are some platforming jumping bits in there which aren't exactly a joy to play through due to the view. Again, just like with 1987's Masters of the Universe, the arcade game, you're trying to make those precision jumps, but because you've got the controls working against you, and also in this case the view of your character, trying to sort of get those precision jumps done is going to likely result in you losing a few lives. Again, not necessarily from a lack of skill, just because of the bad controls. Oh dear, some things never change. For the majority of the game, you are pretty much just walking around, collecting keys, fighting baddies. By the way, the combat isn't particularly good either. It's not a terrible game, but it's not a particularly interesting one either. Again, this is a real shame considering the power of the Game Boy Advance. And especially when you look at other games that came out for the Game Boy Advance featuring other 80s cartoons that had made a revival, such as, again, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, who managed to have an excellent game on Game Boy Advance. It's a real shame that He-Man once again missed out on the chance to have the same. Now, scroll forward a few years, and the only He-Man games that were available were those on mobile phone, believe it or not. The first one that we're going to look at is He-Man Tappers of Grayskull. This is a mobile phone game for iOS and Android that is now no longer available. You literally can't buy this on the Play Store or on the Apple Store. Essentially, this is one of those mindless mobile phone games where you just continuously tap the screen over and over again. The art style's very nice. I do like the wackier, cartoony depictions of the various characters. In fact, this particular version of He-Man actually appeared in the comic book series He-Man and the Masters of the Multiverse, where several different versions of He-Man from across different realities joined forces. So you had the sight of the Dolph Lundgren movie version of He-Man sharing scenes together with the Tappers of Grayskull He-Man. Very bizarre stuff. But this is really the only interesting aspect of the game, as it does get very boring very quickly after a couple of minutes. A much better option for a He-Man mobile game was He-Man, the most powerful game in the universe for Android. Now, players would control He-Man, travelling across 7 different regions of Eternia, with the possibility of summoning allies such as Man-at-Arms, the Sorceress, and Orko in battle against Skeletor and the Evil Horde. Bosses included Skeletor himself, Beastman, Trapjaw, Merman, and Hordak, and later updates to the game also included She-Ra as a second playable character, and King Hiss as a new boss. Sadly, the game, like with the previous one I mentioned, is no longer available on the App Store to download and play, which is a real shame indeed. I would have loved to have seen a game like this come out sort of back in the day. If this had come out during He-Man's original cartoon run, it would have been declared as an all-time classic. I suppose the technology probably wasn't sort of quite available there in the 80s. I could see a game like this coming out on the Mega Drive and SNES during the 90s. Probably not quite as graphically as good, but on that sort of same level. But of course, by that point, He-Man wasn't on television by the time the Mega Drive and the SNES came out, so that wasn't going to happen. So finally, we saved the best till last, and the reason why I've saved it till last is not only because it's the best one, but also because it's not actually an official game. He-Man and She-Ra is a fan-made game using the Open Beats of Rage engine. Now, I'm likely going to do another video where I'll talk about this game engine in more detail, but in a nutshell, it basically takes the idea of Streets of Rage, the classic scrolling beat-em-up from Sega, and allows you to use different assets, existing assets or new assets, have your own backgrounds, have your own characters, etc, etc. And what they've done here with the He-Man title is absolutely fantastic. I mean, just look at this. It is the only game in the video so far that has used the Filmation style, the music, and the sound effects that we all know and love, making this look and sound a lot more authentic than any officially released He-Man game. The game even starts with a perfect rendition of the intro from the cartoon. Not only can you play as He-Man and She-Ra, but also the likes of Teela, Man-at-Arms, Ram-Man, Battle-Cat, the Sorceress. You can even play as Orko. I mean, why not? You can also play some of the villains too, so the likes of Skeletor, Evil Lyn and Panther can be taken into battle to fight alongside the likes of He-Man and his mates, as Hordak and his evil horde have taken over all of Eternia. And as a fun bonus, we've even got Lion-O in there as well, from the Thundercats cartoon. So at least we can say that at least the Thundercats have finally got themselves a decent video game to appear in as well, as anyone who ever played The Lost Eye of Thundera will no doubt agree to. So this game is like playing a scrolling beat-em-up like Konami had back in the late 80s, early 90s with the likes of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Asterix, The Simpsons, Bucky O'Hare, X-Men, and many, many other franchises. It is a little glitchy at times, but to say that this is a fan-made game, then that's something that I can easily overlook. But at least you can play this on your PC, you can play this on your mobile phone, and you can even play it on some of these mini-consoles that have come out in recent years, if you know how to hack them. All you need to do is just have the Beats of Rage app, the sort of engine sort of running on it, and you're good to go. And it's not just a scrolling beat-em-up either. The game has got plenty of variety. Some levels have got characters riding on vehicles, such as the Sky Sled or the Wind Raider, and blasting away at foes and obstacles. He-Man gets to ride on Battle Cat, while She-Ra rides on Swiftwind. There's also puzzles and time limit mazes to play through, as well as sections of the game where you have to protect someone from getting attacked by enemies. So yes, there is at least a certain amount of variety in the game. There's also a versus mode where you can have the characters fighting each other, like on the duel mode that you got on such classic Sega games like Streets of Rage, Alien Storm, Golden Axe, etc. In the cartoon, He-Man would punch a rock or a mountain, but he never punched an enemy. Filmation were very careful not to make the cartoon too violent, so it is rather funny to see that in this game, He-Man ends up punching more baddies in the space of 5 minutes than what he did in the entirety of his cartoon in the 80s. Again, I won't go into too much detail about the Open Beats of Rage engine. I think that's going to have to be another video for another time. But in conclusion, I will say that anyone that grew up watching the classic cartoon He-Man and the Masters of the Universe back in the 80s, and always felt a little frustrated that we never got to have a really good video game featuring all the heroes and villains of Eternia, I would say definitely go out of your way to try and play this brilliant fan game. It comes highly, highly recommended. And with the success of the 2 new Masters of the Universe series on Netflix, perhaps we will see more He-Man video games in the near future. But until then, I'll just carry on playing this one. Anyway, that's the end of another little analysis / rant on He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Thank you to everyone that has taken the time to watch this video. If you have enjoyed this, then please take the time to leave a like and a comment on this video. Please also consider sharing this video across your various social media, in particular with anything that's related to He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and retro video games and Open Beats of Rage, if you're familiar with those communities at all. And why not subscribe to the channel as well in order to see my other videos. But for now, thank you very much for stopping by the Big Daddy D Reviews channel, and we'll catch you again next time.